Hi, my name's Eric, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a little different and talk about all of the albums I've listened to for the first time in the first half of 2021. This includes both new releases that I would recommend from the first half of 2021, as well as pre-2021 releases that I haven't listened to before. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments down below what your favorite albums of the year are so far. Check the description box for a link to a list of nonprofits you can donate to. Please subscribe to be here when I post new videos every week, and hit the bell icon to be notified when my videos go live. Without further ado, I'm going to run first through all of the new for 2021 albums that I've listened to this year. The first one in chronological order by release date is The Weight of Many Winters by Graham James, and this is an EP. Graham James is a folk musician from New Zealand, and this EP is really beautiful. I especially recommend the song Northern Lights. It's just so ethereal and gorgeous. The EP was actually released on New Year's Day, and it perfectly captures that wintry feeling. Next was Into the Cosmos by RAKIYAH. This is another EP, and the celestial theme of the album is also very fitting because RAKIYAH herself is a rocket scientist. This EP is full of light and airy and catchy and flirty R&B, and I especially recommend the songs 3 AM and Whoa. The first full album that I listened to in 2021 was Two Saviors by MEEK. You may recognize him as one of the members of Big Thief, an absolutely incredible band. Stylistically, this album falls into the worlds of indie folk and alt country. MEEK has a really twangy voice, and the song Candle in particular just feels like a warm hug. Next, I listened to Ashniko's debut mixtape Demi Devil. There are so many incredibly catchy pop songs on this album. I know that Ashniko is known for sort of blending the lines between hip-hop and pop. The song Deal With It in particular is so much fun. It's such a great breakup anthem. There's a nice variety of styles influencing this mixtape. There's some metal influences and pop and rap and trap and even musical theater. Demi Devil really captures Ashniko's personality, so if you find her as charismatic as I do, I think you'll really enjoy this project. Next, I listened to Karm's self-titled debut album. Karm is a trumpet player who has worked with Paul Simon and Bon Iver. Bon Iver actually features on this album, as does Sufjan Stevens, so definitely check this one out for the guest list. The album's sound is built around brass, as you might expect, which is really cool and unusual, and the album has a nice mix of instrumental tracks and these vocal-centric art pop songs. Next, I listened to The Hope List by Lonely the Brave. Now that I say the album title out loud, it occurs to me that it's a pun on hopeless. I don't know how in like 6 months I haven't noticed that. I literally listened to this in January. This album is full of really melodic and climactic emo rock and post-hardcore. If you enjoyed Dogleg's album from last year, I think you'll like this too. The song Bright Eyes in particular has been one of my most replayed songs of the year. It is just so beautiful. Then I listened to Sympathetic Magic by TYPHOON. This is the follow-up to their album Offerings, which was one of my absolute favorites of the last decade. This album is a little bit more understated, whereas Offerings had this big, long, sprawling journey and all of this imagery. Sympathetic Magic feels a little bit more confined, which is appropriate, I think, considering the times we are living in right now. TYPHOON is an indie rock band that I don't hear enough people talking about. If you like Arcade Fire, you will really enjoy them as well. Next was Arca's new EP Madre. It's just basically 4 iterations of the same song, which is a collaboration with cellist Oliver Coates. The song is Arca's foray fully into modern classical, and it is absolutely stunning. Next was one of a few remix albums I listened to this year. It's called URDATA by Katie Day, and it is a remix of her album from last year called My Data. There are a lot of really exciting guests here, like Danielle Harrell and Ada Rook and Laura Les from 100 Gex. But in particular, the song that I return to the most is the Tomberlin cover of the song Data. The original song Data was so climactic and beautiful and had this glitchy fuzziness to it, but the Tomberlin version strips that back to basically an indie folk cover, and it is just incredible. Next, I listened to A Common Turn by Anna B. Savage. This album is so original. It's like this acoustic art pop with very expressive vocals. If you only have time to check out a couple tracks from this album, I would highly recommend Corncrakes and 2. Next, I listened to Not Your Muse by Celeste. This is a soul album, and I think it works especially well when it is stripped back and more emotional, like on the song Strange, where Celeste's voice really shines. Up next is Ignorance by The Weather Station. This album received a lot of acclaim, and I definitely see why. It is classified as sophistopop, but it really sort of alternates between genres. There are some influences of Heartland rock in there that I really enjoy on songs like Separated. This is one of a few albums this year that I would describe as really heady. The lyrics are very conceptual, like on the song Robber, which I think is very fascinating, and the vocals are again just pristine here. Next, I listened to the album For the First Time by Black Country New Road. This was their debut album. I hate to make another Arcade Fire comparison, but I think it fits here because they really work as a collective and they have so many different ideas and influences, and that's what makes this album so interesting. It's classified as experimental rock, post-rock, art rock, there's even some klezmer influences, and spoken word, one of a few albums this year that involved spoken word actually. This album just has such an original vision to it, so if you're interested in any of those genres that I mentioned, definitely check this one out. Then I listened to Flowers for Vases by HAYLEY Williams. This is her follow-up to Petals for Armor, and I think I actually prefer this one. It has more of a singer-songwriter folk approach that I think suits her voice shockingly well. We know her for being a rock vocalist, so it was a really pleasant surprise to hear her take such an intimate approach. I also listened to some soundtracks this year, the first one being the soundtrack to Minari by EMILE MOSSERI. He also composed the score for The Last Black Man in San Francisco, another really beautiful score for a beautiful movie. I haven't seen Minari yet, but I'm hoping to sometime soon, but this music has me convinced that if the movie is anywhere near as touching as the music is, I am in for an emotional roller coaster. There are some vocal songs on this album that were very surprising and absolutely haunting, so I cannot wait to watch the movie and see these songs come to life. Next, I listened to Super Monster by Claude. I believe they were the first artist to be signed to the label Satisfactory, which was founded by Phoebe Bridgers, so this album was really exciting for that reason, but the music itself sort of falls into a mix of indie pop and twee pop. I would recommend it if you like artists like Clairo. It's very warm and very catchy, and the songs Inner in Between and Jordan are basically constantly stuck in my head. Ooh, next was Forever in Your Heart by Black Dresses. They officially disbanded, but they still are releasing music, which is a gift because this album is awesome. It is available, I believe, only on Bandcamp. It's a mix of electro-industrial and noise pop and metal. It's very noisy and cathartic and catchy. A lot of it feels very naturalistic in the way that it almost feels like a single take or like an improvisation. There's so much to love about the album, so definitely check it out on Bandcamp. Up next, I've got an overview on Phenomenal Nature by Cassandra Jenkins. This album is another that is just so original. It's a combination of spoken word and sophistopop and indie folk and dream pop, and it is so gorgeous. The song Crosshairs is incredible and I listen to it all the time. This album is really heady. There are a lot of deep philosophical concepts going on, a lot of people watching and wondering what's inside their head, and it's almost like Cassandra Jenkins just walked around and took a journal of things that people said to her or things that she observed and just ruminated on them for a long time and then produced this album, and I think that is just so special. Next is one of my favorite releases of the year so far, Carnage by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis. This one, as you might expect from Nick Cave's last album, Ghost Teen, is often very devastating. There are so many incredible songs on this album, like Albuquerque and Balcony Man and Lavender Fields, and of course the title track. If you enjoyed Ghost Teen, this album is very similar. It focuses a lot on that sort of art pop singer-songwriter space, sort of like Anoni's early work, I would say. This album will touch your heart and I cannot recommend it enough. Next, I've got Little Oblivions by Julien Baker. You might know Julien from her work with Boy Genius, made up of Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, and herself. Whereas her prior album, Turn Out the Lights, was influenced by slowcore, this album is firmly in the world of indie rock, and I would especially recommend the songs Crying Wolf and Faith Healer. Next is the first of a few Spanish language albums. This one is El Madrileño by C. Tangana. This album seems to follow in the wake of Rosalia's El Mal Querer. It's got that same sort of mix of pop and flamenco and hip hop, and it is so entertaining. I really enjoy the songs Demasiadas Mujeres, Tú Me Dejaste de Querer, and Nunca Estoy. Up next is Horrorcore by Danielle Harrell. I have been waiting for this album for years and it did not disappoint. It is so high energy. Danny was one of the founding members of PC Music and he produced Caroline Polachek's album Pang, so he is major in the hyperpop world. I absolutely love his last EP, 1UL, and this album really just ups everything. It's very trance and EDM influenced. So there are songs like On a Mountain that are just straight up drum and bass bangers, and then songs like Boing Beat that seem almost like novelties, but that tap so effectively into what has made PC music so special to me for years, which is the way that it hides emotion in unexpected places. And so you have this very active, like pitched up voice basically just screaming at you, and by the end of the song it's this wave of emotions, and it also has a feature from Hannah Diamond. Next is Ode Buongiorno by Bernice. This is a very odd and unusual and very original album. It's got a lot of personality. I feel like the album itself is its own character. It's super charming, but still there are moments of beauty like on the song Infinite Love. A highlight from this year so far has been Clamor by Maria Arnal y Marcel Bagues. This album is another flamenco art pop fusion. It also has quite the impressive guest list, including Holly Herndon and the Kronos Quartet. If you want something poppier, check out Milagro, and if you want something that is very ominous and almost feels like it could have come off of Björk's album Volnicura, check out Hake. Up next is Immediately Remixes by Perfume Genius. This is the remix album for Perfume Genius's most recent album, Set My Fart on Fire, no! This is the remix album to Set My Heart on Fire Immediately, which came out last year. It was one of my absolute favorite albums of the year, and these remixes are really fun. Again, another great list of artists doing the remixes here, including Jenny Val, again, Danielle Harrell, and Katie Day, and A.G. Cook. We've still got some hyperpop overlap going on here. You might recognize this name if you listen to Dorian Electra's most recent album. Next was the EP Lil Mariko by Lil Mariko. She's probably best known for her viral video Where's My Jewel, which is an absolute banger. I love that video so much. This EP is just as audacious. It's almost hard to describe, partly because it crosses so many genre lines. It definitely has screamo elements because much of Lil Mariko's delivery alternates between sort of sweet valley girl delivery and just top of her lungs screaming. And also because so many of the lyrics are very out there in an internet savvy way. There's the song Don't Touch, which just slaps and I listen to it all the time, but also the song Cat Boys. We all need a furry friend, right? Ugh. Next was Still Woman Enough by Loretta Lynn. This is a straight down the middle classic country album. If you don't know, Loretta Lynn is an icon in the country world. Her album Coal Miner's Daughter is often considered one of the best country albums of all time. This album reworks a lot of her older music, so if you really like traditional country or are trying to get into it, this is a great place to start. Next, I don't know for sure whether I should consider this a 2021 release because it's technically just a delayed release. It's the Her soundtrack by Arcade Fire and Owen Pallett. As you might know, Owen Pallett is a chamber pop musician. His song A Bloody Morning was one of my favorite songs of last year. I still listen to it often. It is incredible. This movie has been out for like 8 years, so if you were interested in it, I imagine you would have already listened to it or at least seen the movie, which is a movie that I absolutely love. But yeah, another great soundtrack for if you're looking for some beautiful instrumental music. Next was Chemtrails Over the Country Club by Lana Del Rey. I reacted to this one in full, so I'm not going to say much, but obviously, I love it. Nothing really else to say. Next is another almost entirely instrumental album, Promises by Floating Points, Pharoah Sanders, and the London Symphony Orchestra. I would recommend movements 4 and 6. This is another modern classical album, so if you're not really into that genre or into instrumental music, I would check out those 2 tracks that I recommended because movement 4 has some of the strangest and most original elements, whereas movement 6 has the more conventional swell of the orchestra that you might be looking for in this type of music. If I am turning red, it's because it's hot in here and I don't want to open a window because noisy neighbors. Anyway, next was Deacon by Serpent with Feet. This is a really nice progression in Serpent with Feet's style. The songs feel more like tableaus, and of course, Serpent with Feet's voice is just so gorgeous and has such a distinctive vibrato. This album is warm and romantic and features a great appearance by Neo, another fantastic R&B artist. We've got another appearance of spoken word here with For Those I Love by For Those I Love. This album was written for the artist's best friend who sadly passed away, and it is a series basically of spoken word passages delivered over house music, and it is so unusual and captivating. If you picture like the moment in a dramatic movie where it's the climax and the music is picking up and they flash back to all of the moments earlier in the movie, and we are meant to just feel so wistful for all of the things we have gone through with these characters, if you imagine that moment spread out over an entire album, that's what this feels like. You might hear spoken word and think, not for me, but if you enjoy house music or electronic music or anything that will make your heart just feel so broken, definitely give this one a listen. Next was Kishibashi's Immigrant EP. This is the companion to his most recent album, Omoyari, a very amazing album from him. This one again focuses more on history and takes a more indie folk approach, which I think works perfectly with his signature violin, and it's even got a Regina Spektor cover and a Dolly Parton cover. Next was Roadrunner by Brockhampton. If you enjoy Brockhampton's other work, you might find this one to be a bit different. It definitely leans more towards traditional hip-hop than towards pop rap, but the music is still as energetic and compelling and personal and political as ever. Next, I listened to They're Calling Me Home by Rhiannon Giddens with Francesco Turrisi. This is an album primarily of traditional folk songs. Rhiannon Giddens, in my opinion, is one of the best vocalists working in any genre today. She's just an incredible talent. Like much of her music, this album focuses on death, as you might have been able to tell from the crows on the cover and the ominous title. And as with all of Rhiannon's music, it draws a connection between the past and the present that's as inspiring as it is disturbing. Next was Tomorrow's 3 by Sun Lux. This isn't the only Sun Lux album I will be talking about today. This is the third, of course, in their trilogy of Tomorrow's albums, and this one I think might be the best. In general, they're considered art pop, but they've got these electronic and post-rock and glitch elements, and appropriately being the last in this trilogy of albums, it is also the most dramatic, which I love. Next, I've got two reissue type albums. The first is Epic 10 by Sharon Van Etten. This album consists of covers of the songs from her album Epic by artists like Fiona Apple, Shamir, Lucinda Williams, Big Red Machine, and if you enjoy Sharon Van Etten's work, it'll be really interesting to hear it from a different perspective. And second, we've got Ska Dream by Jeff Rosenstock, a ska rework of his album No Dream from last year. This is so much fun. I really enjoyed No Dream, but for some reason, this approach to ska just takes it up a notch and makes it all the more fun. You can tell just how much fun Jeff Rosenstock was having when he was making this album, and it is absolutely infectious. Next is the EP Civilization 2 by Caro Caro Bonito. I would highly recommend the song Princess and the Clock. It is a fairy tale, but it's also this synth pop journey that is just incredible. Next, I listened to Nurture by Porter Robinson. This is an electronic pop album full of affirmations of life. It's very inspiring and touching. There are so many songs that I return to on this album because the production is so progressive and interesting, but also because the melodies are strong. I would highly recommend Look at the Sky, Musician, Sweet Time, Mirror, and Unfold. Next was Vulture Prince by Arooj Aftab. This album is so incredibly beautiful. There are multiple genres converging here, but I think it mostly falls under the category of Pakistani classical music, as well as ghazal. It's spelled this way. Ghazal is both a poetic form and a musical form, and it involves a lot of mourning and heightened emotion that I think this album captures beautifully. It's unlike anything else I've heard this year, and I cannot recommend it enough. Next is Puta by Sahara. This is another Spanish art pop album. A lot of the songs are very climactic and emotional and driven by a dance beat, like the songs Taylor and Berlin U5. As the album's cover might suggest, it captures something that I love about art pop, which is the meeting of the profane and the elevated. Next is There Used to Be Horses Here by Amy Speece with the Orphan Brigade. This is a country and singer-songwriter album and very much a passion project for Amy Speece. This was inspired by the death of her father and funded in large part by a Kickstarter campaign. Her vocals are fantastic, and if you're wary about country and are thinking about giving this one a listen, definitely check out the title track. Then I listened to Convocations, which is a compilation album from Sufjan Stevens. It includes 5 albums of ambient music inspired by the death of his father. With that in mind, it is very emotional and very introspective. It doesn't feature Sufjan's voice at all. He did feature his voice on some of the songs from Aporia, his collaboration collaboration with his stepfather Lowell Brahms, but here it is purely instrumental, so if that's something that you enjoy, definitely check out this compilation because there is plenty to listen to here. Next, I listened to Ali and AJ's new album, A Touch of the Beat. This is very grown-up synth pop. It's been so amazing to see their progression since Insomniatic, which was one of my favorite albums growing up. This falls sort of in the synth pop soft rock world of acts like Haim, so if you enjoy that style of music, definitely check out this album. Next is another fantastic country album called The Marfa Tapes by Jack Ingram, Miranda Lambert, and John Randall. I'm sure you've heard of Miranda Lambert. She's had many hits. This album has more of the feeling of a live album or like studio sessions, and it is so strong. It's got that classic country mix of forlorn ballads and funny songs about drinking. And again, if you're thinking about getting into country music, this is yet another different approach that might help guide where you will be going within the genre. Next is one of my favorite albums of the year so far, Daddy's Home by St. Vincent. This is very different from Annie's prior work. It is more psychedelic funk influenced, and I think she pulls it off extremely well. And for the fans of Tori Amos out there, she actually mentions her on the song The Melting of the Sun, which is a tribute to some of the great women in music who have inspired her. If you've only heard the lead single, Pay Your Way in Pain, you might think that this album is sort of odd and confrontational, but actually there's a lot of that warmth that we love in St. Vincent's early music on the deeper cuts of this album. So if you're a fan of Annie's earlier work and are worried that this is going to be too different for you or too out there, definitely give it a chance. I absolutely love it. Next is another album that took me completely by surprise, Sensational by Erica DeCazier. This is a Y2K influenced R&B album, but it never feels like pastiche. The instrumentals are so lush and so up to date. I love them so much. This album is consistently catchy. I have been finding myself listening to these songs over and over, songs like Someone to Chill With and All You Talk About and Busy. She also has this office professional aesthetic going on in the visuals for this era, and I think it's so clever and so fascinating. Next, I listened to the highly anticipated Sour by Olivia Rodrigo, and this album really exceeded my expectations. It is sequenced really well. It is constantly entertaining and fun. I love Good For You. It is such a banger. If you enjoy that song, definitely check out Brutal, and if you enjoy more singer-songwriter leaning sadder songs like Driver's License, then also check out Happier. Another one of my favorites this year has been Sparkles and Debris by Lydia Ainsworth. Lydia Ainsworth does not get enough attention. She writes, produces, and performs all her own music. All of her albums so far have been very different. This album is more influenced by R&B and funk. Her earlier work was odd and glitchy in very entrancing ways, and the latter half of this album has a lot of that. But if you want some climactic pop songs, check out the title track and especially Parade, which I cannot get out of my head. It is so beautiful. I've got another EP here with Antenna by Dizzy Faye. It looks like it has this 90s aesthetic, so you think it's going to be just a throwback, but again, it feels so up to date. Songs like 360 Baby are so much fun and so original. And just look at that cover. I mean, you cannot go wrong with this. Another remix album I listened to was Apple vs 7G by A.G. Cook. This is a remix of both of his albums that he released last year, and it features some artists like Caroline Polachek, Sarah Bonito, Hannah Diamond, and frequent collaborator Charlie XCX on the song XCXoplex, which is one of my favorite songs of the year so far. If you're at all interested in hyperpop, AG has been one of the biggest influences on the genre. Next, I listened to Un Canto por Mexico Volumen 2 by Natalia Lafourcade. This is, of course, the follow-up to her Latin Grammy Album of the Year award-winning album. Just another incredible collection of Mexican folk music, and probably her 20th and 21st recordings of the song La Llorona, which I'm not complaining. I absolutely love her performances of that song. Up next, Doom and Sun by Bachelor. This is basically a supergroup of Melina Duterte from J-Som and Ellen Kempner from Palehound. As you might expect, this is some really fun dream pop and indie rock. It feels sort of like a buddy album, if that makes sense, in its collaborative spirit, and it's a lot of fun. Next, I listened to Change Phobia by Rostam. He was the producer for Vampire Weekend and has since produced for Carly Rae Jepsen and Haim. Whereas his debut solo album Half-Light was very sunny, this album is a little bit more tortured. I wouldn't quite call it tortured. He still has that lightness of spirit, but it's a little bit more introspective. And there are some nice and romantic songs like From the Back of a Cab and Forerunner. Next is one of my absolute favorites of the year, Jubilee by Japanese Breakfast. Michelle Zauner has been absolutely killing it this year. She released her new book, Crying in H Mart, which was a New York Times bestseller. She composed the score for the video game Sable. Her book was picked up for film adaptation, and now she produced one of the best albums of the year. If you want a new wave banger, check out Be Sweet. If you want some chamber pop goodness, check out Paprika or Kokomo, Indiana. And I didn't realize until recently that the song In Hell was a direct answer to her earlier song In Heaven, which is actually my favorite of hers and makes it even more heart-wrenching, despite the album being so much happier conventionally than her prior music. Next was Candle Power by Marina Allen. If you like some weird 70s folk, this will absolutely hit the spot for you. It really reminded me of an album that I'm going to talk about later that was some 70s folk, but this is really original, especially in the folk landscape of today, and I really enjoyed it. Next was Blue Weekend by Wolf Alice. I know a lot of people were raving about this album, so I was very excited to listen to it, and I definitely understand the hype. It is some beautiful dream pop. One of the highlights from this album for me is Delicious Things. It really epitomizes what this album does best. It has a beautiful melody, great vocals, and it's washed in reverb. If you want a live album, check out Live Stream at Home Los Angeles 2021 by Bad for Lashes. It's available only on Bandcamp, but if you enjoy Natasha Khan's music, definitely check this out. Her vocals are, as usual, immaculate. Next, I listened to Mother Nature by Angelique Kidjo. This is African pop and specifically a Pan-African sensibility. She believes in unity and political progress through unification, which I think is really beautiful. There's a lot of high energy, very fun stuff on this album that's extremely uplifting. I actually first heard of her a few years ago when she made a cover version of the album Remain in Light by the Talking Heads, which I'm actually going to talk about in just a couple minutes. And so even if you're not familiar with African pop, I would definitely check this out. It's very accessible and a lot of fun. Just gotta mention the Platinum Deluxe edition of Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure. I love the album, and this is such a great deluxe version. All of the deluxe tracks were fantastic. I really enjoy Please and especially Hot and Heavy. Next, I listened to Ancient Dreams in a Modern Land by Marina. You watched me react to it, so you know how much I enjoyed it. It was released on the same day as Slater's new album Troubled Paradise, so I wasn't able to talk about that one, but I thought it was a strong follow-up to her self-titled debut mixtape. There is still that hyperpop core, but it definitely leans a little bit more accessible with songs like the title track. She also tackles some more hip-hop, which is really fun and which I really enjoyed in the past on songs like Cha-Ching. And speaking of hyperpop, the release I listened to most recently was Rebecca Black Was Here by Rebecca Black. This EP really effectively walks the line between mainstream electronic pop and hyperpop, and I think Rebecca Black is making a strong case for herself, not just as a novelty from our collective internet past, but as a pop star. Now I'm going to talk about all of the pre-2021 albums that I listened to for the first time this year, but I'm not going to mention the albums that I reacted to because you already know how I feel about them. First, I listened to Lanterns and its companion EP Alternate Worlds by Sun Lux. This is some very original electronic art pop. I absolutely adore the song Lost It to Trying. It is so anthemic and climactic. I cannot recommend it enough. But if you listen to Lanterns, definitely listen to the companion EP. There is a remix of the song Easy that features Lorde. Not a lot of Lorde fans know about it. It's sort of a hidden gem that I highly recommend also. Next, I listened to Lodestar by Shirley Collins. This is a traditional British folk album. Shirley Collins released her first album in 1959, and she released her most recent album in 2020, so it is amazing to see her still working and still making music that is so compelling and so beautiful. I love the stories that she weaves into her music. They're often romantic and tragic, and it's exactly what you want in a traditional folk album. Next, I listened to the EP Cruel Practice by Shy Girl. Obviously, Alias was one of my favorite EPs of last year. I listened to it all the time still. This EP was pretty different. It was a little bit less punchy, it was subtler, and it was almost more sinister. Songs like Rude and Gush are so off-kilter and interesting, and so if you enjoyed Alias, I would highly recommend this EP as well. Next, I listened to Arrival by ABBA. I am on an ABBA album journey on my own. I have, of course, listened to their greatest hits albums, as well as Voulez-Vous. So far, my favorite of their studio albums, non-compilation albums, has been Voulez-Vous. This album has, I think, slightly weaker deep cuts, but the highlights, those songs that everyone knows and loves, are so strong that they make this album great by their own merit. There may not be deep cuts as incredible as Good as New from Voulez-Vous, which is already one of my favorite ABBA songs, but this is the album with Dancing Queen on it, so That kind of says it all. So since it is getting hot, I am going to burn through these, no pun intended. Then I listened to So by Peter Gabriel. This is some art pop from the 80s and it is absolutely fantastic. Kate Bush makes an appearance on this album. I highly recommend the songs, of course Sledgehammer, which is the biggest hit from this album and I cannot stop listening to it, as well as Red Rain. Then I listened to Where Did Our Love Go by the Supremes. I really enjoy the girl groups of the 50s and 60s. This album was so much fun. Even though I didn't grow up in that era, of course, Motown is super nostalgic to me and you will definitely recognize and love the singles from this album, like the title track as well as Baby Love and Come See About Me. Next I listened to Confessions by USHER. I was really impressed by this album. I love the song Throwback. I don't hear enough people talking about it. I listen to it all the time now. We all know the song Yeah, and of course it's a banger, but I think what goes underappreciated about this album is its narrative perspective, which I think kind of caught me off guard and really impressed me. And of course Usher's vocals are just fantastic all the time. I also listened to Los Angeles by Rosalía. I wanted to go back to her early albums, and this is totally different from El Mal Querer. It is more traditional flamenco and Spanish folk music, but Rosalía's vocals really shine here, and it's just beautiful. I listened to American Pie by Don McLean. We've all heard the song American Pie. You've probably also heard the song Vincent, at least if you took a middle school art class like I did and your teacher played it for you. But this album is so impressive. It's such great folk music. There's such a great focus on story and on American culture. I was blown away by this album, so if you like the song American Pie, please check this album out. Another album that completely took me by surprise was the Delta Suite by Bobby Gentry. This is a country album, but do not write it off because it is country if you do not like country, because it is so different. It was way ahead of its time. It even used samples on songs like Reunion, which is a banger. It's hazy and dreamy, and it has such a great variety of soul styles and folk styles. The Delta setting really comes through. It's a one-of-a-kind ethereal take on country music, and if you have any interest in the genre of country at all, I cannot recommend this album enough. I also listened to the Wicker Man soundtrack, the original Wicker Man movie. I love the movie itself, and so I knew the music from watching the movie, especially the songs Willow's Song and Gently Johnny. If you haven't seen the Wicker Man and have only heard about it as a horror movie, you will be surprised to learn that it is a musical, and the music from it is incredible. I wanted to get more into the history of disco, so I listened to Bad Girls by Donna Summer. This is over an hour of dance bangers. This album really is designed for a full night at the club, but it also in the back half contains some ballads. And continuing with my disco education, I listened to the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack by the Bee Gees, and it is incredible. I love the fusion of disco and classical on some of these songs, and all of the singles by the Bee Gees are recognizable and they are classics. I also listened to Remain in Light by the Talking Heads, as I mentioned. This album is so much fun, it's so high energy, it combines punk music with Afrobeat, and of course the song Once in a Lifetime is fantastic. I am running out of battery here, so I'm just going to list off a few more albums that I listened to. I listened to Hunting High and Low by ABBA, which of course contains the song Take On Me, which is a classic. I listened to Torres' self-titled debut album, which is fantastic if you like folk music. Same goes for Let Me Go, Let Me Go, Let Me Go by Jason Molina, the late frontman of songs Ohia. I realized that I completely forgot to mention Hadestown by Anais Mitchell. I absolutely love this album. It is a folk concept album. You might recognize it from the musical that it inspired, and I haven't seen the musical before, but I really want to now because this album was amazing. And I listened to 4 other classics for the very first time: In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson, Pastel Blues by Nina Simone, Songs of Leonard Cohen by Leonard Cohen, and At Folsom Prison by Johnny Cash. King Crimson is prog rock with a lot of folk influences. I was very surprised by just how ethereal so much of the album was. Pastel Blues is iconic in large part because of Nina Simone's incredible voice, as well as the songs Sinner Man and Strange Fruit. The Leonard Cohen highlights that I'd recommend are of course Suzanne and So Long Marianne, and At Folsom Prison is shockingly upbeat considering its context. I would go into more detail, but I don't want to keep you around here forever and I don't want to run out of battery. So thank you so much for watching, and please let me know your favorite albums of the year so far in the comments down below. Check the description for that donation link. Please subscribe to be here when I post new videos every week. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you are staying safe and healthy, and until next time, that's it.